Can you clap once for me? Lovely. Okay. Yeah, all good. Yeah.
Phones off.
Yep.
Okay, first of all, Lynwood, can you tell us what was the music scene like in Charlotte at the time, the early 70s?
It was really a thriving scene. It was very much the halcyon period. There was a drugstore called Stanley's, and the region in Midtown Charlotte was called Stanleyville, where all the artists used to hang out. And there was so many different types of music, bands. There used to be concerts at Freedom Park. We have to mention Melvin Cohen of Reliable Music, who was sort of the patron saint of the music scene in Charlotte. And just so many wonderful bands. Let's see, of course, George and John. There was the Federal Bureau of Rock and Roll that was headed by a guy named Lenny Federal. There was a band called The Good, The Bad, The Ugly. And, you know, how many afternoons we spent in Central Park listening to it. And also got to realize that Charlotte in the 70s was enthralled to a top 40 radio station that refused to play any alternate music. And there was it was actually a radio training school. It taught DJs how to play, and every Saturday night they would play play an hour of alternate music, and we all would wait eagerly for Fred Cornu and WYFM to play the latest hits that we couldn't get in Charlotte. And a couple recording studios, and
Cool. No, that's all right. That's cool.
Go ahead.
You're going to make a noise on the door, is that?
That's all right. So we'll just wait a second. I'll put your heads up.
We rolling?
Almost.
Okay. Give me a count.
Cool. Okay. And when you're ready.
Okay. You know, forgive me, I'm a Southerner. I digress. I don't care how long the journey takes as long as it's interesting. Anyway, we recorded two of George and John's songs at the Arthur Smith's studios on Monroe Road. Know What It's Like and Long Ago Today. But Arthur Smith had a group called Arthur Smith and the Cracker Jacks. Well, anyway, when Deliverance came out, they had the theme song that was so, played to death over the radio called Dueling Banjos. Well, anyway, Arthur Smith had written a song in the 1950s called Feuding Banjos, and what had happened was the people who played the song on the movie soundtrack had been at a bluegrass convention and heard someone play it and said, "Who wrote that song?" And they said, "Oh, that's just an old-time traditional song." So they recorded as Dueling Banjos and put it on the soundtrack, so it went probably quadruple gazillion platinum. And then Arthur Smith called up Paramount Studios and said, "Boys, I think we've got a problem here. That is my song on your movie, and I don't know how much it was a pitiful amount, like $25,000, for the rights to use my song." And basically they said, "We're Paramount Studios, and you're some dumb Southern hick, and we're not going to give you anything." He says, "Well, I think I'll let my lawyers take a look at this." Anyway, this is the way I heard the story. I might be embellishing or misremembering. Well, anyway, as it turns out, he did indeed write the song called Feudin' Banjos that the people had heard at the Bluegrass Convention and put on the soundtrack. And Paramount, he sued them in court, won, and Paramount Studios had to yank all the prints of Deliverance and re-release them. And if you notice at the end, the song Dueling Banjos is based on the tune Feuding Banjos by Arthur Smith. Anyway, that's the studio where we recorded some of their best works. Now, I can't remember where I was because I always get sidetracked.
If we just go back to how did you first meet?
Well, we both went to the same high school, and we all were in the same sort of social circles. And I'm thinking here, he was always part of the woodwork, and I was editing an underground paper with a group of friends of mine called the Inquisition, and there was just the alternate scene, and George was part of it, and a musician. And his mother taught art. She had basically her kitchen was a studio where she would teach kids art. She's a fabulous artist. She died last year. And here's another bit of trivia. George's father worked at Celanese, which is a textile company, and they were notorious for letting people work 20 years or however long it was until they were about to vest their pensions, and then they would fire them, and people wouldn't collect any of their pensions. And they did that to George Shaw's father, and he filed a class action suit, won a goodly sum of money, and set a precedent. So everybody nowadays who works at an American company and doesn't work the full number of years or whatever still gets a portion of their pension, and that's all because of George Shaw's father. And George was actually in the class under me, and I honestly can't remember how we met, because he was always part of the scene. And I had been curious. Anyway, I was writing music with another charlatan named Wally Groteforce, and we were writing songs, and met with George and said, we'd like to write songs together. And I actually was studying organic chemistry at at Florida State University with the world's leading expert on sesquiterpene lactones, which even at the time I thought, what possible use can sesquiterpene lactones have? Well, as it turns out now, 40 years later, they're turning out to be tremendous cancer fighters. So anyway, one day I walked into I definitely did not fit into organic chemistry academia. So anyway, one day I walked in and said to Dr. Werner Hertz, the world's leading expert on sesquiterpene lactones, I'm dropping out of graduate school to manage a rock and roll band. And anyway, his expression should have been bronzed. So a couple of us who had been doing the underground paper, and my wife at the time, Lisa, we started a rock and roll promotion company. And we had a couple concerts at the Park Center with local musicians, including John and George. And now this is something that has troubled me for 40 years, and I think hopefully now at long last I can atone for it, is that and this probably was especially galling to George, you have to realize George thought in music. Some people think in images, some people think in words. George thought in melody and harmony, just unbelievably so. So when we were doing this concert, it was called An Almost Free Song and Dance, and it was, mostly pop alternate groups, and we gave George Shaw a playlist. He wanted to do his more modern, creative, innovative stuff, And we said, no, you can't play that because the people there just aren't, advanced enough to listen to it. So we gave him a list of like Beatles songs and Stones songs, and they played. Again, he could do a cover forward, backward, upside down, incredibly innovative. He could sound exactly like the musicians who performed it originally. But anyway, we said, no, you have to play this bog standard songs, and I have just, regretted it. Edith Piaf, I still regret a lot. And George, wherever you are, I beg your forgiveness for imposing this playlist upon you. And then,
Can I just reset
sorry,
there?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
that okay?